We're starting the gram-positive rod chapter with the Bacillus genus, which includes Bacillus anthracis and Bacillus cereus. We decided to make the scene for the bacilli about a group of Vikings and a Viking king. We named the Viking king King Anthra, and he'll be carrying a mighty axe. So the title is King Anthra's Axe, for anthrax. So now let's get to this epic backdrop. Alright, so we'll start off drawing the Viking. And we'll give him a little sword. Okay, now I'll give him some hands. Okay, and a little Viking boat in the back. Now he's going to be fighting this dude. Oh no, you cut my arm off. Blood everywhere. We decided to switch things up a little bit. We're going to be doing the illustrations in-house. In fact, I'm going to be the illustrator from now on. Don't worry, you can expect the same level of quality. My parents love my work. Just kidding, here's the real backdrop. Let's start talking about our main characters, the Vikings. So the Vikings have just conquered this new land, and they're standing in part of their path of destruction. A ring of fire from a recently sacked and razed village. The dead, black, charred center of the circle with surrounding red-hot flames nicely illustrates a black eschar, or a black necrotic cutaneous lesion with a surrounding erythematous ring. We hope that if you're shown a picture of an eschar, you immediately associate it with this ring of fire. The next thing you need to know about Bacillus anthracis is that they're often described as looking like large gram-positive rods and chains. This is a good ID feature to keep in your back pocket. It's unusual to see rods and chains, so if you're thinking Bacillus as soon as you hear it described, you'll definitely have an advantage on test day. To reinforce this, we're going to draw Viking ships in the background, and they'll be lined up, and they'll have large rod-like sails, also lined up as if they're bacilli in a chain. Now let's focus on the Vikings again. You'll notice that they have armor on, and in the past, like for strep pneumo, if something has armor on, it means it's encapsulated. So Bacillus is also encapsulated. However, their capsules are somewhat unique. I know it may seem like a burden to memorize these additional features, but really unique features are great for us because if we hear them, they act like buzzwords, and that really helps clue us into an answer. So the unique feature about the capsule is that it's made of protein. The other capsules we've talked about are made of polysaccharides. So to remember protein, we've made their armor leather. Leather is obviously a protein, so this should help you remember that. To go into even more detail, the capsule is made out of poly-D glutamate. If you remember poly-D, you should be able to pick it out in a question. So how do we illustrate poly-D? Originally, we were going to have our Vikings GTL along Jersey Shore, but in our beta test we found that any mention of Jersey Shore in our videos immediately made viewers stupider. So out of concern for your health, we've eliminated any and all Jersey Shore references, and we'll just represent poly-Ds by drawing multiple buckles on the armor that are in the shape of Ds. So these multiple Ds are poly-Ds. Bacillus anthracis is an obligate aerobe. This means it can only survive in the presence of oxygen. Our symbol for obligate aerobe is going to be an air bellow. We'll have our Viking on the left using this bellow to stoke the flames. Just as the fire needs air to thrive, so does the obligate aerobe. Since there are many obligate aerobes that you need to remember, we're going to use this bellow as our standard recurring symbol. Bacillus anthracis is best known because of the 2001 anthrax scare, which demonstrated its ability to be weaponized. It was sent in envelopes directly to victims. And what does a paper envelope and a plate of blood auger have in common? Well, not much, which makes it pretty tough for bacteria to survive. However, Bacillus anthracis can form spores, which means it hibernates in a state without any significant metabolic activity, and with the sturdy protective covering, it's highly resistant to temperature and chemicals. So it's able to survive an extremely long time in almost any environment. The only two genuses that we'll learn about that are spore-forming are the Bacillus and Clostridia species. Spores are small and durable, and they grow back into their metabolically active state when the environmental conditions are favorable. In this way, they're very similar to nuts and seeds. So we thought an intuitive symbol for these spores would be walnuts. In this illustration, we'll draw some walnuts roasting over the fire to help you remember that Bacillus anthracis is spore-forming. Walnuts will be our recurring symbol for spore-forming bacteria. Now we're going to discuss perhaps the most testable portion of Bacillus anthracis, its toxins. There are two toxins, lethal factor and edema factor, which are abbreviated LF and EF. And actually both toxins have to be present to cause symptoms. The first toxin we'll talk about is edema factor, or EF. Let's use the left side of the scene to remember this toxin, and to demarcate this, we'll give the Viking on the left a shield, and we'll carve in the letters EF. So EF functions as an adenylate cyclase, which increases CAMP intracellularly. Then this increase in CAMP causes fluid to go into the extracellular space, which means it causes edema. This edema inhibits host defenses and indirectly prevents phagocytosis. To help you remember that edema factor increases CAMP, we're going to draw a Viking tent, and this means that we're in a Viking camp. I know that you might be thinking, but Andrew, you guys use tents to represent the camp test in Group B strep video. Why are you using conflicting symbols? Well, the answer is actually really simple. It's Saud's fault. Please feel free to send him an email telling him how terrible of a person he is. No, don't do that. Well, you can, but seriously, we'll continue to use the idea of a camp with tents to represent increase in CAMP. Now we're going to move on to the next toxin, lethal factor, or LF. Let's use the Viking on the right to remember this toxin, and we'll give him a shield that says LF. LF is an exotoxin that acts as a protease and cleaves MAP kinase. MAP kinase is a signal transduction protein that's involved in control of cell growth, and ultimately LF is responsible for tissue necrosis. This is an important association that can be hard to remember. To make it simple, we're going to draw a map here, and have our lethal factor Viking burning it. And this map represents MAP kinase. And the Viking's burning it because the burn looks like the black eschar, which will help you remember that the lethal factor causes the tissue necrosis seen in the eschar. Another manifestation of anthrax is pulmonary anthrax, commonly referred to as wool sorter's disease. The spores of Bacillus anthracis can survive for long periods of time and are often found in soil. So the spores can get into the wool and hide of animals and persist there for a long time. When people handle this wool, they may inhale the spores. Then the spores eventually germinate in their lungs and cause these pulmonary symptoms. To help you remember this association with sheep's wool, we're going to draw a sheep over here to the left side. We're also going to put some sheep's wool over the Viking's armor. This will reinforce the idea of people getting the disease when removing and working with the wool, and also makes our Vikings look a lot cooler. Pulmonary anthrax starts off with non-specific pulmonary symptoms such as a dry cough. It's important to catch and treat anthrax early, because the organism can rapidly move to mediastinal lymph nodes, and within no time, the symptoms can progress to hemorrhagic mediastinitis. To help you remember this, we're going to give our King Viking, King Anthra, his large axe, and it's sort of shaped like two lungs. The axe will be covered in dripping blood, and this should give you a good way to remember the pulmonary hemorrhage caused by Bacillus anthracis. And just as this axe would have been really scary to go up against, pulmonary anthrax is also scary to go up against. Once you develop pulmonary hemorrhage, it's associated with an almost 100% mortality rate. On chest x-ray, this hemorrhagic mediastinitis is classically described as a widened mediastinum. To help you remember this, we're going to draw a Viking ship with a mast that is meant to look like a chest x-ray. The horizontal white lines look like rib shadows on the x-ray, and this rope wrapped around the mast is widening the mast. So this not only reminds you of the words widened mediastinum, but it also gives you a visual idea of what widening of the mediastinum looks like on chest x-ray. I think that's pretty cool. If anthrax is caught early, it's treatable, and you should recognize that fluoroquinolones are the drug of choice for anthrax, and that a secondary treatment is doxycycline. To remember this, we're going to add one more Viking ship in the background, and have it have two large decorative shields on it. The first will have a pink flower, and the second will look like spokes of a bicycle wheel. The pink flower will be our recurring symbol for fluoroquinolones, or flower quinolones. Bicycle wheel will be a recurring symbol for doxycycline. Cycline for bicycling. Think you got it? Now it's time to cover Bacillus cereus. B. cereus is also aerobic and spore forming, and there's very little more that you need to know about this microbe, so we'll be able to represent all the additional information with one character. The most important thing you need to remember about B. cereus is that it's associated with food poisoning. And the classic history for this type of food poisoning is someone who comes in with vomiting and maybe diarrhea after eating reheated fried rice. So we're going to remember this literally by drawing another Viking down here, reheating rice over the fire, and vomiting. And that's all. So we've covered the two Bacillus species, and now we're going to move on to the Clostridia genus, which are also spore formers.